Securing the Realm, GitHub Coding Agent, and Vibe Engineering.
Hi there, I'm Lloyd-Jones from Securing the Realm.
I'm Josh McDonald, also from Securing the Realm.
Today, we're going to be talking about the GitHub Coding Agent, one of the new features that was shown at Microsoft Build by Satya when he was updating a legacy application on stage. Now, typically, we'd start this by showing Visual Studio Code.
And there it is. But today, we're not going to be starting with that or doing all that much on it today.
Correct. Yeah, the new GitHub Coding Agent is entirely within GitHub. Now, think about GitHub Agent Mode. Josh, when you've been running it, what are some of the things that you've noticed?
I mean, there's a couple of things that come to mind with Agent Mode. All the kind of power and speed aside, one of the things I think is that it requires not just, a human in the loop, which of course we support, but it requires a human in the seat, I guess. You need to be there to keep it going. You need to provide it input. You need to sometimes just click continue. Sometimes it will get caught in the kind of like the pool of requests, peak times, especially US times of business hours. Sometimes it will grind to a halt a little bit just because there's a huge amount of demand fluctuation. Yeah, it requires a human in the seat, and sometimes that's not really fitting with our flow of work in particular.
Yeah, so closing down now Visual Studio Code, I'm going to start off by assigning an issue to the GitHub Coding Agent, and then we can talk about what it is. So as usual on this podcast, we talk about something relating to Dungeons and Dragons. We've been working on this AI-powered game. It's all working pretty well, but you can see some issues here, right?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we wouldn't have that kind of text we've got for the titles. It's not very accessibility friendly. And, you can put prompts in to be accessibility friendly all you want, but it's not always going to pick up on those nuances. It's not looking at, an output in the same way a human is with their eyes.
So while we talk through this, here's an issue I've already made. So as a user accessing the Campaign Hub, I want a clear, visually appealing color scheme for the Campaign Hub. I've actually made this under the wrong repository. Let me transfer that and start again.
There's some strong business analysis there with a really good, clear, crisp user story, some acceptance criteria. I love that.
Yeah, so we've got the instructions here that a human should understand. We've got a screenshot, we've got the acceptance criteria. So now what makes this different from Agent Mode, which you'll know I can actually also open in code spaces, is I can actually assign Copilot just to work on the issue, like I might assign Josh or another colleague to work on this.
Yeah, this is particularly interesting for me. And look, we've got that little emoji there.
I didn't post that. I love that.
It's reviewed it, and Copilot's already started to get to work.
Yeah, so Copilot starts and picks up the issue and creates a pull request that it works from. We can also see that Copilot started work on my behalf. I think this is going to be hilarious actually to see how Copilot really inflates my commit history by showing that I've done significantly more work than I've done. Spinning up the dev environment, and that enables to actually see what's taking place. So we can go back to that later. We'll let it do a bit of working. But I think let's start by talking around how we got started with this. So let's talk through the template, the product requirements document, decision records, and Copilot instructions. So this is the template, Josh. Do you want to talk through a little bit about what we were thinking when we pulled this together?
Yeah, so really the kind of core of this is making something that is beneficial to both humans and AI about getting started with a project. So the template in particular is going through the types of content that we need for our project and some of the key decisions around that project, not just around documentation, but also some of those technical decisions made, which also links into some of the other artifacts as well. So the template really holds a lot of this together. It gives structure to not just us in terms of how we go about what we're designing and defining, but for Copilot, it uses this template to inform how it creates, even things simple as pull requests. When I say as simple as pull requests, not really that simple, but kind of content that it's producing, as well as the code it's producing.
So I've ranted before about vibe coding, still a term I hate. And we're trying to define a little bit more about what vibe engineering is. So if you think of this model as a large language model is something that's incredibly fast at developing code, but isn't intelligent in the same way that a human might be. It's still a model that's forecasting what comes next. So we need to really think about how we can put guardrails in place so that as models write code, it's writing code in a way that is trackable, traceable, in a way that we know that the new code isn't breaking what's already there with a series of tests, and the code adheres to standards. So we have general coding instructions defining for the model what folders should you use, where should you place architectural decision records and specifications, user guides, what do you need to do before each commit, how do you write and label, what are the naming conventions, and then getting really specific with Python. I don't know about you, but when I've run Python, I've had Python applications that use pip, that use poetry. I'm a fan of something called UV at the moment for package management. I specify that because unlike a human, the agent's not going to open up a repository and go, they've used pip, let's keep using it. You might get using anything, installing it, and end up with 3 different systems for managing libraries.
Yeah, that's definitely happened to me. I remember getting started with some Python projects with GitHub Copilot not so long ago. And all of a sudden, like out of nowhere in an existing code base, it would just start using Flask and just fire that up. It's done things like created virtual environments for my Python and then never used them at all, and just kind of built everything in kind of outside of the virtual environment. So I think having a clear construct to work from that isn't just based upon the code base you're looking at, but on what you want it to do going forward and how you want it to go about it, the orderings, that's all really important. And what I found really interesting about doing these Copilot instructions was that you can have the different hierarchies. So you've got your generals, you've got your Python, but the general still applies to the Python because that has things like branding and styling in it, simple things like that sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerful. And I mean, so we showed you the template and we talked about GitHub Copilot Agent working asynchronously, which means that we're not there to monitor the actions as they are taking place. Do you want to talk through a little bit more about the product requirements document? Because that was the very first artifact that we started with.
Yeah. And so I think this was really just born out of being very aware that if there's assets, text-based assets even, prompt libraries, stuff like that, in a repository, Copilot knows it's there and is able to act on that information. It understands it very well. Even if you've got an incomplete README, for example, it will start to build the rest of the code if you ask it to from the README, if it's an incomplete project. So the PRD is kind of bringing us back to kind of business analysis roots, really, with a project. It's useful for humans and for AI again. So looking at setting out your problem statement, looking at the vision for the product so that it has that context of what you're trying to do and why. Going into user stories. For the second time today, we're looking at user stories, good kind of as a type roles, all the way through to the benefits you're looking at, the acceptance criteria. This is some really rich context for people and people and AI around what is the end solution expected to look like, or at least what problems are we trying to solve and what could it look like, technologically speaking. So we've got quite a lot in here around, the workflows of the different agents, because we want to make our D&D game agentic. We want it to be a multi-agent model where the dungeon master is kind of pulling together things from an artist who is creating the imagery of the characters in the party, of the maps that people are exploring. And you're able to kind of put that into paper and have it as a basis so that you're not trying to just do it all in one prompt and fire and forget and hope for the best. You've got something that it can kind of chip away at, which again was where our coding agent comes in, right?
Yeah. And speaking of the coding agent, let's check in on that. Okay. So if I open up the pull request, I can see that the coding agent has now created a plan. It's saying I'm going to analyze the current styling and contrast issues. I'm going to update the CSS files due to fantasy theme colors. I can make the heading more prominent, make sure that all text meets accessibility contrast ratios, and then verify it. It also says that the campaign hub is using colors that don't align with the theme. Let's use the established theme colors. And then if I go into the session, I can actually see it's been running for 8 minutes now. I can see step by step what's happened. It's reviewed the campaign selection. It's reviewing the current state. It's reviewing the test and the expected behavior. And it's going into a lot more detail about what it's going to do. And it's continuously updating the pull request. So you get a full visibility of what's happening. And that also, this is important. We talked about using tests in the original Copilot instructions. Because we've built those tests and because we've told the agent to continuously produce tests, as the agent is working, it's continuously running the test to make sure that nothing's been broken, which is where this again differs from agent mode and using ChatGPT to write your own code, because we're using standard development practices here, like integration testing and unit testing.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things that sets it apart. That battle that you talked about of like vibe coding, and that's not really the way to go about things, and trying to turn it into something more disciplined in the way of vibe engineering if we're going to have vibes involved in all of this. Because what you're looking at is being able to bring AI into the CI/CD process and bring people into it, to be fair, as well. Because it's participating in that process with you. So it has been quite good to actually force the discipline on the AI, because it forces the discipline onto you. But, in conjunction with the artifacts we've been talking about, it really has a big step change in terms of quality, what you're actually producing.
Yeah, and speaking of artifacts, some of the best open source projects I've seen use architectural decision records to document the decisions that were made, the context, and why they were taken. And so we even have a decision here with a template. We have a decision here around the various different technology implementations. And I think a good one to open is GitHub Actions CI/CD pipeline. So we said we needed a robust continuous integration deployment pipeline to ensure code quality, catch regressions, and maintain system stability, because it's going to get really complex. So the decision was to implement front-end testing, back-end testing, integration validation. Then on each pull request, a temporary Azure environment is created to actually test out the application. There's also a production deployment as well. We have our detailed test strategy for the front-end and back-end, and our deployment strategy. The model itself for this and has considered alternatives like Jenkins, GitLab, Azure DevOps, looking at the positives and the negatives, as well as notes on the current implementation and review. How have you found the model's kept these architectural decision records up to date?
It's been really good, actually. I think what was very interesting is when we started the project, really not that long ago, actually, to actually get this into build, we kind of showed it the kind of architectural decisions we've made. And it made a very big point of reviewing those architectural decisions and being like, okay, these are good. I'm also going to add some of these going forward as well. And then since then, across different chats, across different issues using the coding agent, is stuck true to those. And this is really solving a problem that we've had in the past around being able to keep the kind of train of thought going with GitHub Copilot, so that you aspire to do one thing, but like 3 chats later, it kind of forgets that because of context windows, and also it's a different chat. It's kind of not got the same kind of statefulness. Whereas now, using documentation and artifacts, you're able to keep it honest throughout that and keep people honest too.
And the tests make sure this continued to work. So we have unit tests, integration tests. We even have playwright tests, end-to-end tests using playwright to actually validate the key user flows. Like a QA tester might actually loading the application, creating a character, configuring, validating the AI Dungeon Master. So it's quite detailed. And then if I go back now to the agent that we had running before, I can see it ran the test to make sure the changes didn't break anything. it ran the selection of related tests. All the tests are passing. And then it also has updated the progress report on what it's done. So we can actually see that the pull request looks like it might be done. The title's updated, the background's updated. We've got the choose your own adventure. And if I approve workflows to run on this pull request, we should see all of the tests are triggered to run. We should also see that the environment is deployed specifically to review that one pull request. So there'll actually be a specific deployment, which means we're not breaking production. How have you found using that?
I've found it pretty good at, when I think back to where testing and QA was using GitHub Copilot 12 months ago, maybe even less, it struggled to do anything beyond setting up a basic unit test, really, or generating like a test script for something like the kind of REST test extension. It could do basic individual things like that, but nothing like what we're seeing now in terms of being able to essentially recreate the environment for a kind of individual branch for the pull request. Yeah, I found it really helpful. And it's another one of these examples of what GitHub's doing that is a departure from the traditional prompt-based interaction with generative AI. One of the things I've talked about quite a lot in the past and moaned about is that a lot of the primary use of AI interaction is through prompts. Now, GitHub Copilot's had for quite some time from the beginning, near enough, the ability to do other things. So like right click and explain the code or generate a test from the code or kind of inline kind of suggestions to your code base as you're working through it to kind of get past that prompt-based interaction. Of course, with agent mode, that is very prompt heavy in how it kind of comes about kind of solving the problem for the end user. But being able to go back to proper human-based workflows where we're kind of creating an issue and seeing it through to the very end of a pull request that you then go on to merge. It's been really cool to see how we can have AI interactions, especially in the kind of development chain, that go beyond just prompts. I think that's been my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, and you can actually see that while we've been talking, the pull request deployment actually failed, and we were able to see the workflow run, see why it failed. But it failed because one of the issues failed. So I'm now actually able to say to Copilot, the front-end tests are failing. Fix these issues, please. And Copilot goes back to work, figures out what it may have broken, and then is able to make sure those tests are working, which again gives us much better traceability rather than in the past where an agent mode might just break the code that you're working on. And you have no real way to fix it rather than just rolling it back or just reviewing line by line what it's done.
Yeah. It is quite handy that you're not having to just sit at your desk and kind of run through this as it's working. Obviously, you can go back and review it and then feedback via comment. But you don't want to always spend that 11 minutes just sat there watching it do something. You can even go off and raise another issue separately elsewhere or work on a different issue yourself, and it will just kind of work on it. I guess one of the things that I imagine people would ask when introduced to Coding Agent for the first time is, why would you use this over agent mode? Apart from, we talked about, you don't have to be there for it. Do they fit different purposes?
So it's interesting. I don't off the top of my head know what model GitHub Coding Agent is using, but GitHub Copilot Agent Mode gives you significantly more control over what is running. It's all running on your machine. You can still do breakpoints, debugging and tracing in real time. It's not an agent that's running elsewhere. You can inject much more. You can pause. You can also pick between a model like Claude, Sonnet, version 4 right now, or Gemini. So I think that's one of the things. If you're running it locally, you always have a lot more control. But then I very much do like the asynchronous nature of writing a ton of issues. We had 62 open at one point, all just assigned to Copilot.
Yeah, and I guess that probably has a change in itself as well as to how you look at, development of features and, bug fixing. Instead of trying to fit what you're trying to solve in a particular chat and, a series of prompts, you're raising individual issues for discrete tasks, which it then goes away and works on asynchronously. And you kind of deal with the merge issues as they come along.
Yeah. I know we plan to continue working with this just to show how you might harden this, how you might apply security practices in a future session, because this isn't something we've really done. So we're very much deleting the environments between use. We don't want folks to be, increasing the number of tokens we're using or making our actual environment very expensive. But to show you where we're up to now, I mean, it's rudimentary, but it implements the full Dungeons and Dragons rule set. We've got the ability to generate portraits like you see below, battle maps, we've got abilities, the inventory, items, spells. Honestly, the amount that this has at this point is actually quite crazy. It's even got tests not just on the way the application works, but on the full rule set to make sure that it's implemented the Dungeons and Dragons rule set appropriately, which is just wild. So yeah, and I'll just show you here's an example of that battle map, which I just clicked, and I can now actually see square by square how that battle map might work.
That's a big change. So I remember when initially doing this, and the image model's mature as well, which helps. But being able to feed it context from the other agents as to what's going on. So, the Dungeon Master agent setting the scene, painting that picture. But it's not just a mental picture. You're able to turn it into an image. It's really been a big change from the kind of sometimes chaotic messes I was getting as a custom GPT and the prototypes.
So just to wrap this up, what's your one takeaway about GitHub Coding Agent? What have you noticed?
If I had to pick one thing, it's much more flexible in its use for people. So I can give it a discrete task to work away on. I can do it on my phone. I don't need to fire up VS Code and try and figure out how that works on an iPhone. I just raise an issue. As long as I give it sufficient detail and I'm discreet enough with how I choose to assign work to it, it'll go away and do it. And then I can review the outputs in GitHub wherever I am and introduce it into the code base through pull requests. So not only is it mobile, but you've got that kind of rigor to AI code generation again.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at as well. I think my main thought is specifications are now king. The role of a business analyst and a tester becomes even more important, but the way in which they do those roles might be different. The business analyst making significantly more use of AI to generate user stories, and a tester very much monitoring the output of the tests and configuring them over time. Because Copilot did get stuck on some of these things with the WebSocket implementation and bicep deployment. A human like me had to go in there and fix it. Yeah, it's honestly, compared to where we were a year ago, I think this has totally changed the way in which I develop going forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we saw when GitHub Copilot was initially adopted, as well as the amount of code that's generated goes up, but the amount of test coverage across a software project goes up as well. And with this, the coding agent, I've noticed there's been another significant shift upwards in terms of our own test coverage, just from being able to set up tests to debug very quickly. And then run those and feedback the results, being able to check the AI's work also being very crucial, like you mentioned, but being able to use AI to assist with that where appropriate. Test coverage is like completely different to some of the other things I've worked on.
I guess there's also going to be the issue of cost as this goes out into production, looking at tracking premium requests, because it is expensive, but it also enables you to move much faster. So I think that's going to be a big trade-off for organizations to consider.
Yeah. And organizations have to deal with that already in some ways, but in a different structure. So, if you want to stand up a software factory currently, you need some, dedicated roles. You need a dedicated team, really. And whilst those specialists are still needed today, you need the same kind of dedicated practice to be applied to an AI software factory. And, we were still needed to be kind of working along this, whether it was creating documentation for AI and ourselves to develop from, running the tests and making sure that we're satisfied with those outputs and creating those tests. Humans aren't going away anytime soon with software engineering, but there's always a cost element in having that rigorous software practice anyway. So having AI as part of that cost is just a different shifting of the cost profile for these things and the investment required.
Thank you for your time. I know it's getting towards the end of your day, start of mine now. I guess we've got the GitHub repository. If anyone else wants to try it, that'll be in the show notes listed below the YouTube video, and we'll return to it for some security hardening.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Speak to you
See you
soon.
next time.